everyone, and welcome back again to my podcast, Breaking Stereotypes. Last week, we started a new series looking into how sex workers are portrayed in crime shows, and we started by examining one of my favorite crime shows, Law & Order SVU. Overall, we decided that other than a few dated stereotypical representations, SVU actually does a pretty good job at depicting women in this line of work in a more positive light. Now, I'm just going to go ahead and jump right into this episode because I am so excited to be discussing my favorite TV show of all time, the cinematic masterpiece that is Criminal Minds. I honestly could have a whole podcast solely dedicated to my love for this show, but I digress. The specific episode we're going to be taking a look at today is from Season 2, Episode 11, called Sex, Birth, Death. In this episode, the detectives at the BAU are trying to find a serial killer who has been going on a killing spree targeting local prostitutes in Washington, D.C. We end up finding out that the killer's motives behind the murders was to cleanse the town of, quote, impurity. One of the clues that the detectives found was a memo from the killer that he wrote about killing the prostitutes, where he made remarks like, "Whores meander on every corner and work in every alley. They are low women. They walk among us, sick with sin." And another one saying, "We must exterminate them." Another interesting tidbit of information for this episode was when Dr. Reed noted that prostitutes are the number one serial killer target, which is both horrifying and terribly sad. All of these details and bits of information from this episode, I think, are a fairly decent representation of our society's attitudes towards women in sex work. Now, I don't mean this to the extreme that everyone wants to take to the streets and brutally kill these women, thank God. But I do think there is something to be said about people looking down on these women as dirty because of the work that they do. I do not think that this show necessarily agrees with or heavily pushes the idea that prostitutes are dirty and of lesser value than other people, but I do think that the episode is a lens more so into people's internal attitudes towards women in sex work. I think it's also worth to mention that there are some similar themes between this episode of Criminal Minds and the episode of SVU that we discussed last week. The prostitutes in Criminal Minds are very similarly dressed as the prostitutes in SVU, again perpetuating the stereotype of women in sex work as being very promiscuous. Now, while this episode of Criminal Minds does not focus on the rehabilitation for these women like SVU did, it still shows the detectives in the show treating the prostitutes with respect and like they're real human beings who are deserving of our care. I think this could be really beneficial for our society, seeing these women being treated like real people by authority figures, even if it is just on a TV show. I think that honestly, any depiction of women in this line of work in a positive light is one more small step in the right direction towards equal treatment, which is the exact direction that I love to see people moving in. Overall, I think we should view this episode of Criminal Minds as a way to reflect on our societal standards and how we could change these to better help all types of people reach the respect that they deserve, even women in sex work. And now, once again, with all of this being said, it is time for the grand reveal of my very official rating of the show and how it depicts women in sex work. And drumroll please. I give Criminal Minds a very firm 7 out of 10. I think this episode is great and that it provides room for the viewer to reflect on their own attitudes towards these women in sex work and has the potential to begin to challenge any negative views that we may have. However, there are still a few dated stereotypes that were presented that still have room to be overcome. So, if you're like me and are still totally obsessed with Criminal Minds and my favorite man, Spencer Reed, no worries here because I still fully plan on binge watching this show probably sometime later this weekend. Well, thanks for tuning into my podcast, guys, and I can't wait to see y'all back next week when we are going to be looking into an episode of CSI Miami. Catch y'all later.